mainstream media is running with a story about a Florida school banning a poem. But as it turns out, it's not banned at all. The poem is titled "The Hill We Climb" by Amanda Gorman. She famously performed it at President Biden's inauguration in 2021. That poem was recently placed under review at a Florida school district after a parent complained that it indirectly featured hateful messages. But upon review, the district concluded that the poem was acceptable for older students. Quote, "It was determined at the school that The Hill We Climb is better suited for middle school students, and it was shelved in the middle school section of the media center. The book remains available in the media center." But the media was quick to jump on that story. Headlines falsely declared the poem as banned by the Florida school, and the narrative even made its way up to the White House, with White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre reiterating those baseless claims during yesterday's press briefing.
On Amanda Gorman's poem being banned in Florida elementary school, do you have a comment on that move?
Banning books is censorship, period. That's what that is. When you ban a book, you are censoring. It limits American freedom, Americans' freedom, and we should all stand against that type of act when it comes to banning of books.
Jessica, even the reporter there sort of questioning the veracity of those headlines. And unfortunately, par for the course, Karine Jean-Pierre comes out as unaware or under-aware of the situation. And what do you say about the left-wing media sort of continuing to perpetuate things that end up being debunked or just require like one more sentence, one more instance of deliberation, of nuance, of articulation before we say, oh, those are the facts?
So this is a tough one because I do think that while access to is not the same thing as banning, these school districts or individual schools are making decisions on the recommendation, in most cases, of one person. There's one angry parent who thinks that X thing is inappropriate for whatever age group, and the schools are complying with that. And I think it's a big problem. The Washington Post did an analysis of this, and a majority of the complaints from across the country are coming from 11 individuals. Now, talk about tyranny of the minority there. I also went back in middle school, 6th to 8th grade, right? So I went back and looked at Amanda Gorman's poem. So I was like, let's take a look. Is there anything crazy in there? To compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. One line. She does say that we're not working towards a more perfect union. We're working towards that. And we seek harm to none and harmony for all. I don't know how that isn't a message for a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old. And I do think that there should be outrage on the part of the media and the part of normal parents all over the country who think that this is an abuse and it'll only get worse. We talked about it a few months ago, that a Judy Blume book, Forever, which I read growing up, I'm sure most of us did,
yeah, of course,
was banned about high school students who are in love, considering having sex. That was all of us, right? Or I don't want to put you guys on the spot, but that's a normal thing that's going on in kids' lives. And when you start to take material like that off of the shelves, you are creating book bans and a place where kids can't go to find things to help them understand themselves and to learn.
And Sean, I want to focus on that point for a moment. Let's play a shot of what we heard on MSNBC, because again, the point is that the book wasn't banned, and yet here's how it's portrayed. Watch.
The poem was called "The Hill We Climb." And now, today, it's the latest flashpoint in the culture wars in America. Access to the printed copy of Gorman's poem, that poem, has been restricted in a school library at a K-8 school in Miami-Dade because one parent complained about it.
Sean, there's two takeaways there. Number one, book banning does not equal restricting, and yet to them it does. And number two, the policy is that if a parent raises a question, then the board will investigate. And that should, I would think, reassure all parents that any question they have will be taken seriously. So it's not because one person complained, it's because per policy, a parent raises a question, the board investigates, and they did not ban it as a result.
And what the media does is steps in and tells a story that Florida's banning books on the day that Ron DeSantis is announcing his presidency, when they're not banning anything, right? But here's what concerns me too. Karine Jean-Pierre says banning books is censorship, but banning conservative speech on Twitter, Facebook, and Google is not censorship at all. That's just banning disinformation. What hypocrisy?
What hypocrisy?
Well, and there's more hypocrisy to talk about, because if you look at what the left did with the Dr. Seuss books as well, they determine what racial stories need to be told and what diversity stories need to be told. I went out and bought those books for my black and white biracial children because I said, I love Dr. Seuss. Sometimes the author did touch into, different lanes, and it gives you an opportunity to talk about those things. But before, you couldn't find those books anymore because it really was a ban. It wasn't just a ban, it was a retrieval from the market. Couldn't even get it. I wanted my kids to see that all things are on the table. When the left was wanting to take statues down because so-and-so owned slaves, you're going to tear down the George Washington Bridge? Because I'm going to have to swim to work. Like, what are we doing here?
Right.
So I do think that if we're going to do this, it's got to be more than one parent. It should be a conglomerate of people who talk about these issues. And if access is what they're going to do, then yeah, it can be about age. There's a way to get to the middle here. But this wasn't a banning. I just gave you examples of what were bans.
That's right. And Tudor, to Sean's point, I think a lot of questions are being raised around the language equivocation. So to the left, words are violent, anti-abortion literature is violent, and yet masturbatory literature for 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds is helpful.
Well, and I think that banning is another word, because this is something that even came up in my campaign. Was they kept saying I wanted to ban books, and never did I say I wanted to ban books. But I do think that parents have the right to talk, and even if it is just one parent who comes to the table and says, I'm concerned about this, oftentimes that one person is what sparks other people to say,
yes,
wow, I had no idea,
and
I'm glad. Or other people say, this is hysterics, no, we don't need to do this. But in certain cases, there are places where certain books are appropriate to be in school, but not to everyone. But this is not at that case. This is it is available to everyone in the middle school. And so again, it's a case of the media running with a story that is not there, but it really hurts parents' rights. And that was the goal.
Right.
I don't think any parent is hurt by their 10-year-old having access to a poem that was read at the inauguration
I'm
of the
saying the
46th
media
president.
doing it.
I understand.
You have a hustler and a playboy in elementary school. I'm sorry, it doesn't belong there. You have really explicit sexual books that don't belong in the libraries of kids. Take them out and to extrapolate that and say,
So
we're
there
now in a
are
place
book
where
bans going on.
If it's
There
illegal
are-
to
there
give
are-
porn,
They're in Florida.
If it's illegal
There
to give
are-
all over
porn
the
to
country.
children.
All over
Where
the country.
where does everyone stand on Judy Blume? Just final count.
I never
love
read Judy Blume.
Everyone loves Judy
love
Bloom.
Judy
Put her back.
Of course.
Was I
Well,
supposed to
people
read Judy
love
Blume?
Dr. Seuss books,
Yeah.
but those 5 or
That's
6
a
that were
very-
targeted because certain people felt like there were race issues in there. As
That
a person
came from
of color,
the family also.
Yeah.
It didn't come from a random
No,
Moms
no,
of
it
Liberty
came from a push from the left.
activist.
And appropriateness always plays into it. So the whole point,
Same
we
with
can
Roald
love
Dahl.
something and
We're being
recognize that we
wrapped.
don't want everyone to.
But you know what? I'd love to continue that because it didn't just come from the family.